Tim, welcome to Mitiga Mic.
Thanks, man. Glad to be here.
So before we get going, I just wanted to let our listeners know this will be our last podcast of 2025. Very exciting. How do you feel about that?
You say the best for last. I'm stoked, man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is going to be exciting. I love the topic. Orca and Mitiga, we've been doing so much from a go-to-market perspective. It just made sense to get you on here, one of the chief spokespeople for the organization, certainly one of the most prominent online and at events, et cetera. So really excited. But Tim, before we get going, maybe give some of our listeners a little background about you and how you came up and what exactly it is you do at Orca.
Yeah, so field CISO at Orca. My background over the last several years has been a technical evangelist or field CISO. That was kind of after I hung my hat up of being an actual CISO. And now I get to, just kind of write, read, talk a lot, give advice on kind of my many years, as you can see from the gray hair and the beard in the security industry.
Well, you're like, what, 24, 25? So you've
27
kind of been a
years.
CISO that long.
Nah, not at all. That's right.
No, that's awesome. And, Orca, huge amount of buzz. Like yourself, I'm at conferences all over from RSA and Black Hat to the B-Sides events and everything in between. And certainly cloud security, preventative controls, Orca specifically comes up virtually everywhere. So kudos to you and your team for really planting your flag in the space and letting people know, what it's all about. But again, for some of the folks that maybe aren't as familiar with Orca, maybe you could give us a little bit of an overview of, what's your mission at Orca and what does your platform actually deliver?
Yeah. So we want to be your cloud security platform, right? To help you kind of understand, prioritize, and remediate risk. And so, as opposed to having, 6 or 7 different solutions that monitor your cloud security, maybe a one compliance solution, a vulnerability management solution, an AppSec solution, all of that. We can do all of that in one place. And the advantage, the obvious advantage is tool consolidation. But I think the way that we look at it is that one of the real advantages is this unified data model. So when we take all of this data in from your cloud plane, from your workloads, from the AppSec pipeline, and we put it in one place, that allows you to be able to kind of understand holistically what your risks are because you have more data. You understand the exposure. You understand, is something actually running or just sitting? So having all of that data helps you be able to really prioritize what you need to fix, understand your actual risk, and then ultimately to help you mitigate and remediate all of that risk.
Yeah, one of the things about your solution that I really find interesting, and I think security practitioners get it, but maybe from sort of a observability IT side, it might not be as, I guess, as mainstream. But this notion of reachability, right? You've got these assets, and whether it's a workload or whether it's a specific app, whatever it is it reachable, right? And then predicated on that, there's a different level of risk tolerance, right? Of course, you're concerned about horizontal movement, insider threats and all that, but there's certainly a different level treated from external reachability. I just think that's so important. It's something that got overlooked for, quite a while on the cloud side. But from a security perspective, of course you want to know it. And I love that you guys do that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways that you can actually kind of understand the risk, right? When you're trying to prioritize, you need to understand what's the most likely to be affected inside of your environment. We can't fix everything, and I think that's one of the problems that when you talk with CISOs and security leaders or practitioners, they're like, man, I can't fix everything that I have in my environment. I've literally got 5,000 criticals staring me in the face, right? And so, you can do analysis paralysis and you can sit there and not know what to fix. But from a security practitioner perspective, like that's one of the best areas is something reachable, right? Or is it just internal? And that doesn't mean you shouldn't fix it, but it's one of the ways that you can say, what should I fix first, right? When you combine that with reachability, with exploitability, with, is the library actually running or is it just sitting dormant on a workload? Like you combine all of these things together and that really helps. And I think that's what we're trying to do as a security practitioner is like find ways so that you're not trying to eat the elephant, I guess, so to speak, where, you can just kind of take things one little bit at a time so that you're not overwhelmed.
Yeah. It's like that old adage of everything's critical, nothing's critical. You're
Yes.
sitting in a sock and like to your point, here's 5,000 things. Go drill down on each one of them, as much detail and time and resources as you possibly can. It's like, man, we'll get through maybe 3 today.
Yeah. Yeah. And and on the flip side of that, it's like security practitioners, like we used to be bad at like tossing all that stuff over to the Bowlen team, right? And then they have the same thing. So maybe they're not cloud security practitioners, and we're like, that's not my problem to fix. Well, like they're going to need some help, right? And this just helps a way that you can build that partnership between other teams by understanding their workload and just sending them things that they need to prioritize.
Yeah. Well, let's double click a little bit on the SOC, since we kind of alluded to that a bit. Certainly cloud has changed what SOCs need to focus on, obviously, because there's been a massive movement to cloud. Not everybody that knows security knows cloud, and vice versa. That's for sure. And cloud security experts are pretty rare. Maybe in your company, in my company, we're surrounded by the folks, but once you get out of that, there's not a ton of people. So organizations don't have dozens of cloud security experts. That's like not a thing quite
Yep.
yet. Lots of certs and things like that. But from a high level, and again, because you've been a CISO as a practitioner, and now in your new role here at Orca, how are SOCs adapting to this? How are they saying, okay, we're not embracing the cloud. We have embraced, we are there, things are cooking. How's that changed kind of their approach?
I think they're having to be reliant on other tools. I have to be honest with you, like, because you're, I'll even kind of one up that. Like, not only are people not cloud experts, but they're not multi-cloud experts, right? So if you leave that totally in the hands of a SOC team, maybe you could handle it like at an MDR level, where you can have someone who's an AWS expert or an Azure expert, a GCP expert, and all of that. But at most companies, they're not going to have an expert for every cloud. And every cloud is just so different that even if you get really good at AWS and understanding what an alert means or what you should be looking at in AWS, when you flip over to Azure, things are just different. The way that they assign permissions, the resource groups, the way that the buckets blobs are managed, right? All of that is just different. And so I think it does, from a SOC perspective, I think they have to rely on other tools that understand the cloud space to kind of give them the information that they need to decide if something is a risk or not. Because nobody is in one cloud anymore. Very rarely, I should say, is somebody in one cloud.
Yeah.
It's usually multi-cloud, whether you know it or not. You're usually multi-cloud because different business groups decide what they want to do, right?
I love the way you said that. Whether you know it or not, there's somebody in marketing that is using Azure, even though you're AWS shop. I guarantee it.
Yes, 100%. Or there's somebody in finance that likes BigQuery, so they're in GCP, right? Or something along those lines.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing, it's funny. I was out in New York with one of our customers just a few weeks ago, and they were talking about not just second party and third party, but fourth and fifth party risk, because a lot of their tools are connected with other organizations in the cloud, leveraging other SaaSes. And if it impacts something that they didn't even know was in the chain, it could have a trickle down and does have a direct impact on them. And there have been some pretty, I'm not going to call it any SaaS applications, but some pretty well-known SaaS applications over the last couple of months where that's happened.
Yeah.
But you mentioned, you got the big three, you got, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, but we're starting to see a little bit of Oracle, really a little bit of IBM. And then there's some others too, some international kind of flavored things that are popping up. But certainly the big three come up all the time. And I don't think I'm trying to think if I even have one customer that's just in one cloud. I can't think of one. And that's a good point. You might have all the AWS certifications, and that's great. Fantastic. Kudos for you. But probably you don't have the GCP ones as well. And that's a lot of work.
They're all so different, right? They're all fundamentally, GCP is so based on its workspace product. It's hard to untangle from that. And, Azure's just revolves around Active Directory still, and the way that they do permission. Everything is just so different.
Yeah. It's how they all evolved. Well, even AWS, so I'll just talk from one very narrow perspective, like looking at logs. somebody says, oh yeah, we do AWS logging. That doesn't mean anything. There's about 50 million things that you can log in AWS, from Route 53 DNS stuff, and you've got, all sorts of Elastic Kubernetes, and then you've got sort of the mainstream. There's just a lot, load balancing, whatever. And you would think, oh, it's all from Amazon, so it's all going to be similarly formatted, and I'm going to have the same types of fields and be able to, no, no, Henrietta, it's not at all. Everything is actually quite different between it. And the reason for that, I think it makes sense, is you have different groups and different individuals working on those components. And let's be very honest, the developers that have to work on the logging part, that's not the sexiest thing in the world. It's not the most exciting. When I grow up, I want to build logging for cloud infrastructure.
Right.
So not to say they're doing a bad job, but just to say it's very disparate across all those different pieces just within AWS, right? And then what you turn on and turn off. So it becomes very complicated very quick. And the moment I hear somebody say, yeah, we've got logs turned on for AWS, I know that maybe they don't have all the details that they need. And then we multiply that from everything else beyond logging. And
it's like, what do you do with those logs?
Exacerbates.
I guarantee you they don't know what they're doing with the logs. I still hear a lot of people that turn on like flow logs, and I'm like, what are you doing with the flow logs? Well, I'm paying a lot of money for them. So I don't think they really even know sometimes.
Yeah, I'm paying a lot of money to do egress to old school SIM, which I'm paying a lot of money now to store the data, which they're loving. Right. And then I don't use it. So I was very early on an ARC site and building the SIM industry. And we saw the same thing on-prem with that. And a lot of times people would say, well, I want to turn on all my router logs. Okay. Well, when you say, what do you mean? Do you mean like in debug mode? Because then your router is going to send us a lot of information, but it's not going to route anything because it's going to be so overwhelmed. So there's definitely a balancing act that has to be done. But, we suggest at Mitiga, we tell people, look, you should have at least 3 years of log data for forensic analysis. But if you're spending that, if you're in an architecture where you have egress to a SIM and storage that way, that's going to kill you. There's no way. I mean, I'm not here to pitch Mitiga, but you need a forensic data lake. It should be distributed. You have to have a way to approach that in a smart, whether it's some Databricks or whatever it is in the back end to handle that. But if you're approaching cloud security and cloud log management like you are on-prem stuff, which again, this is where security people came from, you're going to break the bank. And actually, it's not going to work really well either, even if you get it all over there.
No, I think that is a problem still. Like, I mean, I'm sure you talk with customers and the people who are sometimes in charge of cloud security, or the CISOs you talk to, like they don't understand cloud. Like I haven't run into like a lot of CISOs that came from the cloud world, right? They've come from the networking world, or maybe like the GRC world. And so like a lot of times you do end up with folks kind of asking for something that they don't really understand. If they grew up in the networking world and they want all of the logs and they want to store them, and they don't understand the cost. It hasn't been that long. I haven't heard it lately, but it hasn't been that long since people were wanting to put like virtual devices in the cloud to, understand, talk between the two VPCs and like not quite a firewall anymore. I think we're kind of away from putting, checkpoints in the cloud. I don't think we're doing that anymore. But the old school ways of doing it don't work.
Yeah. When people said, well, it's just like on-prem, but it's in the cloud, so we'll do everything like we did there. Yeah, that was the Wild West when everyone was figuring that out. It brings up an interesting point, because the way you explain that, you could have also plugged in the word AI, because you've got a lot of people that, AI is I go to buy a sandwich and there's some kind of AI involved. You say, well, you probably want this kind of mustard on it. No, I don't. But anyhow, it's gotten to the point where there's 3 buckets I see now when people bring up AI, and it's completely in the cloud because it's all based on cloud infrastructure. But it's one, how do I protect from AI centric attacks that they're AI driven? And that's a whole new thing. And usually that has to do with velocity. It has to do with not just the velocity of the attack, but how quickly they can target and go after, and all the different ways they can go after an organization or individual. The other one is, well, I want to have AI, right? I want to have an AI infrastructure, which of course is going to be in the cloud, and I need to protect that, whether it's from poisoning attacks or other types of abuse. So how do I do that, and guardrails and everything in between? Then the other one is, hey man, I've got a lot of security tools, and I really want them to be using AI against the AI. And if they don't have AI, which means that every security, I mean, you walk around Black Hat, you walk around RSA, I'd give you $100 for every company you find that doesn't actually talk in some way about AI. A lot of time it's bolted in. It's not really AI. It's what we would call probably years ago, like pattern discovery, anomaly detection, volumetric analysis, temporal analysis, which wasn't really AI. And we used to call hallucinations false positives. So sometimes just the nomenclature has changed. But how do you feel? And this is such a broad question, I know, before even saying it. But how do you feel AI is kind of shifting sort of organizations' approach to cloud security, and maybe even you can share a little bit of how Orca is sort of looking at that as well.
Yeah, I think they're relying, people are looking at it just from a cloud security perspective. I think they're looking at it with how can it help them sort through the data. All right. I think that, the acceleration to the cloud is still happening. Everybody's still going to the cloud. And so I think when I look at what people are doing and wanting out of AI in the cloud, it's how can I get through this massive amount of data? How can I understand what I have, and maybe use AI to alert me and bring down the false positives. But I think we're also seeing a lot of folks wanting to have them do some agentic AI on the remediation side, right? So I think that's really I would say, the two areas that I'm seeing the most. Obviously, there's I guess you could say the third, where it's kind of um, uh, the advice, right? Like, hey, can you help me fix this IAC script and come up with a new Terraform? Can you tell me why I should care about this critical alert? I don't understand why. Like there is some auto remediation ability there by being able to write the code. But I think, a lot of folks want to know, how can it help me cut through the noise? How can it help me query my data that I have? And then also, how can I use the agents to automatically fix it? I think that's ultimately what Orca's view is, right? Is kind of a this self-healing sort of cloud where you've got the agentic side of AI that's helping you solve those problems, and that's where the unified data model comes in, right? If everything is stored and centralized and you've got all of the context around it, that makes your AI agents, I think, a lot better with being able to help you fix it, because context is essential. And that's the thing that I think Orca gives you and helps you with. And then kind of being able to not only understand all of the data through, Orca AI and asking, hey, write this query for me, show me all of the PII that's externally exposed, that's super good. And then also kind of the self-healing side, if you will, which is okay, I know I have issues and I want to enable remediation so that it's near real time. I think those are kind of where I'm seeing it.
Yeah, and I think that makes good sense. That's the way to approach it. Even at Mitiga, when we process things, it's based on raw logs, not just alerts. We pull in alert information too. If you get something from CrowdStrike watching a workload, that's great data as well, for example. But most of what we do is based on the log data, which is much harder to do, as you know, than doing it based on alerts. But what's nice about that is you can have as many people as you want in a SOC. They're never going to be able to hit the volume levels that your AI, especially agentic AI, is going to be able to leverage to just pull through, terabytes, or maybe, I don't know, maybe exabytes of data, just massive amounts of data, and get you any kind of interesting information so a human can then take that and run with it. And to your point, run it through those automated tools. So I think that's going to be a big help. I really see it complementing our security teams. And there's a lot of talk about the agentic SOC and what that means. And this notion that, hey, I might have a very entry level tier one analyst, but maybe within 6 months, they can operate with the skill level of like a tier 3 analyst because they're leveraging some of these other tools.
Yeah.
So that I really think that's going to play well.
And it helps up level, I think, your existing analysts as well. I think there's an opportunity to, I know we got the level 1 analysts, but I think that AI will help you kind of up level so that they have an understanding and they can learn quicker. There's less of a barrier to entry because you can understand with the context or query against it to just help them learn quicker.
Yeah, they can be dangerous in a few quarters instead of a few years, maybe. That's nice to have. Well, let's talk about threats. Let's talk about the threat landscape. You're at ground zero for what's going on out there in terms of cloud attacks, and what the bad guys are doing and what they're focusing on and how they're doing it and how they're pivoting, and this cat and mouse game of defend and respond to these different attacks. How is the threat landscape sort of morphing? And maybe you can even attack it from both the attacker's perspective and maybe even the defender's perspective to those attacks.
Yeah. No, I think there's two ways that I can think of immediately. I think one is, I always say that identity is kind of a lot of times the key to good security, right? Because if you don't have your identity right, then that's a problem because people will. That's kind of the easiest attack vector to get around all these other things you have. You could have your network security groups and all of this other stuff set up and locked down so that you don't have anything externally exposed. But if you don't have your identity right, people can circumvent all that. Then what's the point, right? And so from an AI perspective, like I'm seeing folks really kind of changing the landscape there with, it used to be a lot of manual phone calls and poorly written emails that were allowing people to kind of compromise the identity through these phishing, but it's just getting better now, right? It's the ability to understand how to craft better phishing emails by looking at the writings that are online. Like, hey, look at Tim Chase's LinkedIn writings. Write an email like he has, right, in his tone. So that makes it easier. So you're not getting all these misspellings that look poor. And so like there's an entire kind of industry built around that. So I think that's one thing. But I'm also seeing like the attack vector really shift to the supply chain side of like third party software.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we saw this a little bit early on, but I think a couple of things that I'm seeing change is, I've seen a lot of attacks lately, and we've talked a lot about it with our research pod at Orca, where like GitHub is becoming like this kind of playground, I guess, or like where people go to try and see what they can find. Can they find open source that maybe doesn't have the best security practices when it comes to checking in code, right? Can we find somebody's private repo that doesn't have, MFA or some other security settings installed where I can get access to a company's internal repository? So we're seeing the landscape shift there. And the interesting thing is, I think that what AI is kind of enabling is it's potentially making attribution maybe a little bit harder because we can see all the types of attacks that others have done. There can be copycats, and the barriers of entry, obviously, to doing those kind of things are lower. And so, when somebody goes in and makes some changes to an open source repository, and then we find out, a package got infected and distributed, it might not be as easy as it used to be to attribute who did that. Whether it's a nation state, an individual organized crime group, or just some script kiddie that's out there messing around. I think because of AI and the ability to generate code and copycat code, I think that's really shifted and made it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I think you raised a really interesting point in terms of barriers to entry. Um, a lot of the attacks that we see, the attackers are logging in. They're not hacking in because, there was some attack further down because some secret was grabbed, token, password, whatever, some type of key from GitHub. Well, now that's letting me get through Okta and get on Slack and then et cetera, et cetera. So there's that. I was at a B-Sides event in, I think it was Indiana. And I was co-presenting with one of our customers, Redis. It was great. They have some great stories to tell, and they're really core to cloud computing these days as well. So some really great tech. And right before our talk, they had this talk on vibe coding. And you go, oh, that's cool. There's a lot of buzz around that. Mm-hmm. So the presenter said, hey, does anybody in here not have any coding experience and not have any security experience? And this guy raised his hand. He was a college kid, so maybe he was like 19, 20. And he said, yeah. He said, come on up. I'm going to teach you how to hack. So does anybody here want to volunteer their name and their company? And this guy said, yeah, I'm, Bob, I work for ABC. He said, okay, Bob at ABC. He goes, we're going to use vibe coding up here with somebody that doesn't know anything about security or anything about coding to write some code and go ahead and do this. And it was basically just a Q&A with the system, and it was asking them some things, and it was uploading it to the cloud. It even had version control. It was really, really well done. And within about 10 minutes, They had about 50,000 lines of code, and they had all these different ways of targeting them. And it basically gave them a menu. It's like, oh, by the way, this guy has a daughter that plays soccer that they found on social media. So one of the good attacks would be send a spear phishing attempt that says, hey, Bob, I got a great photo of your daughter scoring a goal at the last game. What parent's not going to double click on that, right? And then, oh, if you can't get through that way, here's where they have some internet presence, and here's some web servers, and here's the one that we found is running anonymous FTP, and just sort of that thing. It kind of walks them through. And this kid's like, I don't even know what these words mean. What's a FTP? So the barriers to enter are so small now.
They are. I had that exact same conversation I laid out the other day with somebody when I was talking about this. Was like, could you just not craft a prompt that literally says, this is the person I want to impersonate? Go out, see if you can find, any social media presence to know where they may be, in the next, in the last week where they've been, and then make a personal email that pitches to them that, you may have something that interests them. Like if you craft your prompt in such a way, like what's to stop it from being intelligent about it? And you don't have to do all that recon yourself.
Yeah, it's amazing. I see that really changing the game. Well, thank God for companies like Orca and Mitiga. So to that point, see that nice little segue? So Orca and Mitiga, we've been partnered for a while now. Integrations, go to market. We have some shared customers, and it's just, to me, it's like Reese's peanut butter, right? It's chocolate and peanut butter. They just go so well together. But I wanted to hear from you. And for our listeners, I didn't talk to Tim beforehand, say, hey, Tim, I want you to say, I honestly want to hear your perspectives on integrating our tech and, your raw take on it. And, what do you think about the integrations of our solutions, as well as from a customer side? What do you think the value points are for them?
No, I mean, I think it's great, great partnership. I think the value is there, right? Having all of this data centralized coming in from different points is what's essential, right? I think, there's the advantage of having the Orca data kind of do its thing with helping you understand what it should send to Mitiga. And then Mitiga obviously takes it in from different viewpoints and kind of gives you this centralized view. And I think that's what a customer is looking for, because they're looking for the overall cloud security is important. Like SaaS, like AWS, that cloud security, but combining that with AI, combining it with SaaS security, like all of this, and giving you kind of a greater CDR perspective, I think is what's needed in the industry, and to help you distill it down. Because once again, it's all about, SIM was kind of the old way of doing it, I think, where like you get all of this data, and then everybody's got to be an expert in everything and know what queries they're building, or you're dependent on your SIM to have all these pre-built queries that keep up to date. But I think being able to partner Orca and Mitiga and provide all of this and help customers prioritize and understand the active threats, I think that's where it's at.
Yeah, I agree totally. I mean, just the notion of, so, our whole approach at Mitiga is we want all your multi-cloud details. We want all your identity details, whether, if you've got Ping and Okta and Active Directory, we want all that. And we want all your SaaS stuff. And if you've got the three of those, you have really your fingers on the pulse of what you need for rapid detection, rapid response, as well as this notion of zero impact breach mitigation. So, we all agree bad things are going to happen, and you want to prevent as much as you possibly can, but you want to fill in the gaps with, if something does occur, how do you go ahead and detect it, first of all, with some level of panoramic visibility, and then respond. And from my side, I love what we do. I love the whole idea of CDR and AI DR, leveraging our AI capabilities, and I just think it makes sense. But I also said, look, there's so much in the configuration management side and so much on the preventative side that we don't want to do. We're not the experts in that, and we really want to partner with the people that are the best at doing this.
Yep.
So when we started working together, I was like, look, this is, I use a fancy biology, it's symbiotic mutualism. I think we just make each other's solutions that much better. And as a customer, it's like, okay, you're taking prevention, detection, response, you're putting it together in this magic integrated platform. And this is taking so much load off me, because now at this point I can actually use the cloud. I don't have to spend all day trying to investigate the best way to do this or the best way. That part's being taken care of. I can focus on the business of my business, which I think is a big breath of fresh air for most of these companies.
I agree. No, the business of my business. I like it. Like, let them focus on, I mean, ultimately that's what cybersecurity should be. I know we say it a lot, but it should be, um, business. It should be all about obviously cyber resilience, but business resilience, keeping it up, and letting them kind of make the money and pursue whatever business objectives they have. That everything that we should do should kind of tie to that and enable that.
Awesome. Well, Tim, we're about at time. Again, thank you for being on Mitiga Mic, and thank you for being our last podcast of 2025.
Sounds great. Thanks, Brian.
Take care.